tell you, it makes you very proud to be an American when you see the job that they've done. And people that would not be around today are up there, and they'll be leaving the hospital in a week or 2 weeks or 5 weeks, and in some cases, even in a few days. It's amazing, one in a few hours, and you would never have believed that. So I just want to congratulate everybody. It's incredible. Incredible what you've done. We met quite a few people, and believe me, they're very lucky to be here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Graham Ledger, and welcome to the Daily Ledger. Our cover story, presidential perspective to the massacre on the Vegas Strip. President Trump came to Las Vegas as a show of support for the victims who are now recovering and for law enforcement who are tasked with piecing together a horrible crime, the worst mass murder in modern American history.
On behalf of the grateful nation, Melania and I thank each and every one of you in law enforcement. In the depths of horror, we will always find hope in the men and women who risk their lives for ours. The mass murder that took place on Sunday night fills America's heart with grief. America is truly a nation in mourning. I visited the hospital earlier today, where many victims are still recovering from their wounds. And we ask God to ease their suffering and to speed their healing. We pray for the recovery of the injured and those injured officers who so bravely threw themselves into danger when duty called. And we grieve the loss of the law enforcement personnel who were killed in this vicious attack.
President briefed by law enforcement on the investigation into the killer, 64-year-old Stephen Paddock. But first, he went to the hospital where many of the 500-plus wounded are recovering right now from gunshot wounds.
It hurt so bad. But I knew I didn't want to die. I wasn't ready to die. So I just kept pushing forward and trying to use my best instinct and tried to stay low, and I was being trampled, and it was so hard to move, you know. Everyone was stepping on everybody. And unfortunately, I had to step on people just to get to where I needed to get to. And I knew once I jumped over that fence, I'm like, okay, I'm a little closer to the exit. But the shooting wasn't stopping.
I heard the ground popping. You could see the ground. And I knew that we were under fire right there in the VIP section, because all of a sudden the ground, the AstroTurf, started popping up and down. We ran. My particular route was behind the stage, and while I was running, the asphalt was popping up next to me. In fact, I was wearing shorts, and some of the asphalt was hitting in my back of my leg, which means that he was shooting right behind us. There was just people. It was just puddles of blood, literally puddles of blood.
And so all 22,000 people at that concert are victims of this unthinkable act, whether they were wounded or not. The emotional scars are just as damaging as the physical. And so that's the task now, recovery. Physical recovery and emotional recovery, both could last the rest of their lives. And joining me now from Los Angeles, California, therapist and psychoanalyst, Bethany Marshall, Ph.D. Bethany, the survivors of this attack, all 22,000 of them plus, dealing with the emotional scars right now, they're in shock. Some are in shock now, I would imagine. Some will suffer shock later on. Some will suffer both, immediate and later on. Bottom line is, this may take a long time for them to recover, if they can recover.
If they can. You know, Graham, human beings are remarkably resilient. So I want to inject some hope into the situation, that if they have good attachment systems and they have good support, they can recover. But what makes this so catastrophic and so traumatic is the unexpected intrusion into their lives of something that there's no way to prepare for. It's not just what they experienced in terms of wounds or to their body, but it's what they saw. I mean, there was absolute carnage there. One eyewitness said that the place was strewn with boots. People were literally running out of their boots, purses, phones, things dropped all over the ground. And I think that what we're going to see with these victims, and you're right, everybody's a victim, not just the people who were shot, but from what they saw and what they experienced, is that they're going to have feelings of detachment, disruptions in sleep, appetite, and concentration, problems with their attachments, maybe strained relationships, a wish to isolate. But the number one sign of PTSD is avoidance. One of the things they're going to want to do is to avoid anything that reminds them of the situation, whether it's looking at guns or...
I want to talk more about the PTSD, but first, when you talk about attachment, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but just a short explanation. When you talk about a good attachment system, is that a substitute for family, friends?
It can be anybody. I mean, ideally, it would be your family. It would be your parents, your children, your siblings, your spouse. You know, that if you have people who to support you, that's the number one strategy for coping with PTSD, because then you can tell your story and they in turn can make you feel safe. But if you don't have primary family, it can be friends, your church, your whatever club you're a member of.
So it's your support system. And of course, the president in Las Vegas is probably part of that support system, at least on a temporary basis. It's good to see him there visiting with these folks who were wounded by this attack. But now let's face it, most of those people who survived are now dispersed throughout the country. And they're in their own little world, in their own little microcosms, having to deal with what they dealt with. In fact, I spoke with a survivor just last night, and it was a difficult conversation to have. But he was telling me that he was dealing with the obvious in a situation like this, and that is, why did he survive and the person right next to him not survive? And that's part of what they have to deal with as well.
Absolutely. The survivors are going to have all kinds of questions. Why did I survive? Is there something more I could have done to help? Was I selfish? When I ran, should I have stayed and helped other people? I had a sister of a survivor in my practice yesterday, and she said that it was her brother and sister-in-law who were at the concert, and that one of the things that happened is that the crowd ran into the lobby of a nearby hotel, and then rumors spread that there was a shooting there, so then they all fled to another lobby, and then the rumor followed them there. They went from lobby to lobby, so it's sort of like a cumulative trauma, I think, not just the event at the Mandalay Bay, but then the reverberating effects afterwards.
Okay, so these survivors all probably should seek some form of therapy, possibly professional therapy, as that person you're alluding to is right there. PTSD, you mentioned it. How do you treat PTSD? It's a specific problem that needs, I would imagine, some sort of specific treatment.
Yes, well, first of all, it's important to understand that PTSD is a variant of anxiety. Okay, so when you have PTSD, you feel keyed up and on edge, and you want to avoid anything that reminds you of the traumatic situation. There are multiple therapies for PTSD. There's EMDR, there are trauma therapies, there's cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm a psychoanalyst, so what I try to do is I get the person to bring up the feeling that they had when they were in the middle of the event, and then try to see that feeling as tolerable, or to modulate it in some way, whether it's through meditation or feeling that because they're in the room with me, that they're in a safe situation. The number one thing I tell my patients is that when you're a victim of a trauma, you're going to want to avoid situations that remind you of the trauma. But if you continue to avoid, it'll send a signal to your brain that if you're anywhere near something similar to the trauma, a bad thing's going to happen again. So it's better to get back in the saddle again. In
other words, go to another concert, go to a football game, go to a place where there is a large gathering of people, hopefully in some sort of happy setting, and confront the demon, if you will. And these people are going to cope individually, but really, as a society, we're going to have to cope right along with them, because you were talking about 22,000 people, probably many of whom live in the West Coast, probably many of whom live in the Los Angeles area, in your area, but this is going to have a reverberating effect in their own little communities, is it not?
Absolutely. I mean, all of us, in order to feel safe, to feel good about ourselves and not have anxiety, we all live with the illusion that the world is a safe place. And it is an illusion because bad things can happen. And when that illusion is shattered so precipitously, hurricanes, mass shootings, tornadoes, earthquakes, things like that, it can really place a social stressor for all of us. But I always tell my patients, action neutralizes anxiety. If you're anxious about world events, act. Do some good for a charity. Reach out to somebody who's a victim. Work at a soup kitchen. Talk about it to somebody you know.
All right, Bethany, I want you to stand by, please. Of course, all of this was caused by one person. And coming up next, we will have a profile of a killer, what we know and what we don't know about Stephen Paddock. Page 2 now, profile of a killer, Stephen Paddock's girlfriend, who just returned to the U.S. from the Philippines, should shed some light on the killer. And while his motive remains rather elusive, Paddock's method is pretty clear.
This is the gun shop where mass murderer Stephen Paddock bought part of his arsenal.
He was talking how he was new to the area, kind of visiting all the firearms stores in the area.
Firearms laws in Nevada, where Paddock lived, are extremely lax, says criminal justice expert William Souza.
People are able to buy semi-automatic weapons, handguns, rifles, assault rifles. People also are able to openly carry weapons on them.
And ammunition as much as you want?
There are no restrictions in terms of the amount of ammunition that you can buy or the amount of weapons that you can buy for that matter.
One weapon Paddock used in his killing spree is especially alarming.
It appears that the individual who did this was using fully automatic weapons.
Such weapons can fire 9 bullets per second.
That was the kind of gunfire that was coming out of the window of the 32nd floor of that hotel. And he had massive firepower.
Fully automatic weapons are, in most cases, illegal to own. But there is a loophole.
There are kits available that are legal to buy on the internet that allow an individual with some technical skill to convert a semi-automatic weapon to fully automatic fire.
Police confirm Paddock's guns were modified for rapid firing.
We are aware of a device called a bump stock, and that enables an individual to speed up the discharge of ammunition.
Bump stocks can be bought online for about $100.
One of the many loopholes in our gun laws in the United States that while it is illegal to take an existing semi-automatic and transform it into a fully automatic weapon, that is illegal, and then to own that weapon, that's illegal under federal law. It's not illegal to sell the kit that allows you to do it.
Americans have come to realize that no concert, nightclub, school, or theater can ever be safe from a determined gunman with hate in his heart.
Now, let's be clear about this. It's not the firearm that is the problem. It's not the equipment. It's not a bump stock or any other device that can modify a legal firearm. It's the person behind the gun. In this case, the maniac from Mesquite who was lining up the sights. That is the problem. And Bethany Marshall, this killer stalked his prey clearly. It's clear that that's what he did. He premeditated this murder spree. He thought about it. He planned it out over the weeks, possibly months beforehand, obviously months beforehand if you start drilling down, and we'll do that in a minute. So what does that tell you about this killer?
Well, Graham, he thought about this for a long, long time. And what it tells me was that there was great pleasure and delight in planning this crime. We think about the stockpiling of the weapons as something just to get him to a certain point where he could go on his killing spree. But what people need to understand is that the very act of gathering the weapons was probably a very titillating, satisfying, maybe even satisfying in a sexual kind of way, ritual that enhanced his self-esteem throughout the period leading up to the killing spree.
Okay, so as we look at the profile of a killer, this Stephen Paddock, some of this stuff starts to answer some questions. I'm going to run through a litany of it. a sampling of it, and I want you to give me your thoughts on it. Number one, he checked into the hotel, the Mandalay Bay, 4 days before the event. And then he promptly, according to staff, put up a do not disturb sign. And that stayed there for the next 3 days, except, I guess, for some room service. He had a total of 10 suitcases, we now know, 23 firearms, 2 tripods. The tripods obviously used to stabilize when firing upon his victims from the 32nd floor up there. Fully automatic, there seems to be some difference of opinion from law enforcement, or maybe we're just getting some mis and disinformation about whether he actually had automatic weapons or not. But we do know that he had this bump stock. Also, the target and the planning. Route 91 Harvest Festival, this is an annual event. This year's event, 2017, sold out months ago, back in June. Therefore, if you're staying at the Mandalay Bay, which is obviously catty-corner from the event, you're going to have to make your hotel reservations many months in advance. And so therefore, once again, this guy planned it out months in advance. He had to ask for that specific suite, of course, that faced kind of northeast, kind of toward McCarran Airport there in Las Vegas. So he had to ask for that specific suite at more or less a certain height of the hotel in order to have his vantage point to attack the people below. To me, this spells a very, very methodical mind.
Yes, absolutely. You know, these mass murderer shooters share some things in common that I'm hearing you talk about in this methodical planning stage. First of all, whether you think of like Columbine or Sandy Hook or any of these mass murders that we know about, there's always a fish in a barrel quality. Do you know what I mean by that?
In other words, they're easy prey for the killer.
With people scattering everywhere.
Right.
So let's say bursting into a classroom where the exits are locked, standing at the top of a stairway, or the DC snipers being on the top of a bridge. They always want to have power over their unsuspecting victims. So that's what I just think the 32nd floor is just sort of it's the pinnacle of what I see with all these mass murders.
1984, James Oliver Huberty walked into McDonald's just south of San Diego and murdered 21 people. That seemed to be more of a spur-of-the-moment activity. If you look at some of these mass killings over the years, there are common elements among them, but clearly this one was not spur-of-the-moment. And when you hear things in the news media, for example, that his family had no clue, that his family believes he doesn't have any religious or political affiliations, that he was not on the radar of police. Do you believe that in the end that's going to stay that way? Or in the end we're going to find out some nuggets about this guy that maybe, yeah, wait a minute, no, this guy was affiliated, he did have some beliefs, he did tip people off, but maybe people weren't paying attention?
I don't believe that at all, Graham. I mean, I'm with you that we're going to find some nuggets. What we know about these shooters is they so romanticize the upcoming violent act that they almost always confess to somebody. Either they'll write about it on the internet, they'll make a CD, they'll send it to somebody, they'll talk to somebody about it, but they all brag about it beforehand. Over 91% of these mass murder shooters have had a breakup of a love relationship just prior to the event. All of them feel disempowered in some way in their life. Those are the commonalities. The differences is that they fall into 3 general categories. One is the psychopathic killer. That's the one who's sort of cold-blooded, it's like a thrill kill. It's exciting to them. Then there's the mentally ill, where the person's psychotic, maybe they have command fantasies, there are command voices in their head, and they're delusional. And the third is sort of the depressed axe to grind person who feels bullied and disenfranchised by society, and in some pathological way they want to even the score. I think Stephen Paddock fell into the first 2 categories because his father was a psychopath, we know. He was fairly high functioning in society. He was a gambler. He seemed to have sort of a thrill-seeking kind of life with the gambling and all of that. But apparently his mental health declined just prior to the shooting. There were some reports about possible mental illness. And so it could be that he fell into both of those categories.
All right, so before I let you go, I'm almost out of time here. The girlfriend back in the United States, we know from reports when they were going to Starbucks, for example, he would berate her in front of people, and it was very uncomfortable, and there was a pattern of that. Your opinion, this woman could be a treasure trove of information unlocking what was going on here?
Well, absolutely. She had to know something was going on. She may have been a victim of abuse, but Graham, when her brother called her to tell her he had heard about the shootings, one of her first comments back was, "I have a clean conscience." That implies to me that she knew something. That's a very, very strange thing to say. Instead of, "Oh my God, I can't believe Stephen did this. Tell me more." Her first comment was, "I have a clean conscience." So why is it so clean? What does she know? What was going on in that household?
And one more thing, just as a point of fact, and that is this Route 91 Harvest Festival was mostly attended by young, conservative, very pro-American people, unfortunately, and a lot of them lost their life. Bethany, thank you for your analysis.